Now, we've spoken in part more about the human dogs of war in our last video revolving the dogs of war. We talked mainly about the Italian mercenaries, such as Braganza's besiegers, and all the such. But today I want to jump into a part 2 of that video, focusing on more of the non-human dogs of war, or at least the dogs of war that are absolutely not from Tilea. There are actually 2 units on here that are definitely humans, but not from Tilea. So I want to jump into those. We'll do the same kind of format. I'll read the lore blurb from the Dogs of War 5th edition army book, and as at this point you guys have really gotten a feel for the level of humor that is instilled in this 5th edition. And in general, 5th edition as a whole was a lot more humorous of a fantasy game. They did kind of take the whole, oh, we are fantastical elves and dwarves, a little more less serious, whereas 6th, 7th, and 8th editions were a lot more grim-dark fantasy, with obviously Age of Sigmar being extremely grim-dark. But we'll do the same thing where we touch in on the actual lore blurb, and then we'll jump into who the captain is, their motto, their battle cry, and their general appearance. Seems that you guys really enjoyed that. There is another portion of the Dogs of War that explicitly goes over just their special characters. If you do want to know about that, let me know. There's not a whole ton there, but I can definitely share that for you guys, as I always like sharing all the goodies. But let's start here with an ogre unit with Golgfag's mercenary ogres. So Golgfag is the biggest, ugliest, and quite definitely the loudest ogre to shamble out of the northern wastes in living memory. He soon found himself leading a bunch of almost equally brutal ogre warriors. He quickly developed a taste for man-flesh and joined forces with an orc warlord called Narshak Badtooth. Narshak was busy fighting against the dwarves of Karakadrin high up in the World's Edge Mountains. Golgfag wasn't sure he liked the taste of dwarf, but was more than happy to find out. Narshak thought the ogres would prove just the right kind of troop he needed to sort out the dwarfs. However, he soon grew tired of the ogre's appetite for goblins, booze, and raucous singing. After one particularly loud drinking session, Golgfag and Narshak got into a huge fight. Soon all the ogres and orcs were scrapping. Golgfag tore off the orc's arm and used it to bash his way out of the encampment before leading his lads to safety. Narshak was completely enraged. Golgfag promptly offered his services to the dwarf leader Ungrim Ironfist. He showed Narshak's arm to Ungrim as proof of his sincerity. In the face of such a convincing offer, Ironfist was hardly able to refuse. Golgfag led his ogres and a party of dwarves along a secret track to the orcs' encampment in Broken Leg Gully, so called because of its impossible steep and treacherous sides. The orcs were trapped and horribly slaughtered. Narshak was captured and subsequently bound in chains and delivered to Ungrim Ironfist. Pausing only to loot the dwarf's lord's treasury during the ensuing celebrations, Golgfag headed west into the Empire. There he took employment in the ranks of the Imperial Army, and it was here that he discovered halflings were by far his favorite food. Shortly afterwards, he turned up in the lands of Tilea in the employ of one Lorenzo Lupo. Lorenzo found the ogres to be excellent troops, but a considerable nuisance. The citizens of Lucini were forever complaining of being beaten, robbed, or bullied by the rowdy ogres. One night, Golgfag decided to take rather more than his fair share of wine, directly from Lorenzo's warehouses. When the ogres fell into a drunken stupor, Lorenzo sent a company of pikemen to arrest them and throw them into his dungeons. Fortunately for Lorenzo, an opportunity to be rid of the ogres altogether arrived in the form of a messenger from one of the border princes. The messenger was hiring mercenaries on behalf of his master. Lorenzo cheerfully fitted him up with the ogres, took his fee, and released Golgfag and his crew from captivity. Golgfag was understandably annoyed, but faced with a new offer of an employment, a complimentary baggage train of food, and a firing squad of Tilean crossbowmen, the ogre decided to let matters lie for the moment. Golgfag's stay in the Border Princes proved a successful and profitable one. The ogres grew fat and wealthy. They were kept very busy by one side or another, and were given every chance to indulge their appetite for fresh meat. Golgfag's only regret was the scarcity of halflings thereabouts. When he heard that trouble was brewing between orcs and dwarves, he headed northwards once more. He fell in with a bunch of orcs and goblins, and was soon feasting upon dwarf again. It was after a foray against the dwarves that Golgfag was ambushed by none other than Ungrim Ironfist, his former employer. The canny dwarf led the orc army into a trap using a supply convoy as bait. The convoy consisted entirely of wagons full of cheap ale, which the greenskins duly captured and drained. Golgfag and the other ogres courageously drank themselves into oblivion along with the rest. When they awoke, the ogres found themselves in the dungeons deep below Caracadron, along with the remnants of the orc army. The dwarfs no doubt expected Golgfag to die in this cramped and crowded dungeon, and probably thought that this would be easier and safer than trying to kill the ogre in some other fashion. When the dwarfs finally opened the dungeon some months later, they were startled to find Golgfag still alive. He had eaten every other inmate of the dungeon, including the rest of the ogres, apart from Scaff. Out of respect, his oldest drinking buddy, Golgfag had only, so far, eaten one of Scaff's legs. A great pile of orc, goblin, and ogre bones lay in one corner. When he heard of this, Ungrim Ironfist was so impressed that he ordered Golgfag to be taken a long, long way away and released. Golgfag soon gathered together some of his old lads, and other keen young ogres flocked to join him. Scaff decided to stick with Golgfag despite everything, and gratefully accepted the position of standard bearer, as this gave him something to lean on. Before the summer was out, Golgfag headed south over the Grey Mountains in company with an orc raiding party. It was there that he fought his first battles against Bretonnians, and where he would crack a few tinnies and feast upon man-flesh once more. From that day to this, Golgfag has never looked back. His reputation has, if anything, grown and grown. So has his girth, but he still has a few scores to settle, not at least with the dwarves of Caracadron, and with the treacherous Lorenzo Lupo. However, ogres are straightforward folk, and such things take second place to a good fight and a full belly. So the captain, obviously, is Golgfag. The motto is, "You've hired the rest, now try the best." The battle cry is Grug Agwar, which is a reasonable rendering of the Orcish, a language little understood by other races and hard going even for ogres. The meaning is obscure. It might mean something like, feed me now. And their appearance is ugly, ferocious, and hungry. Golgfag's ogres wear dirty, patched clothing made of skins, leather, and such items as they have pillaged or crudely stitched together from old cloaks, blankets, tents, canvas awnings, etc., etc. Their appearance is obviously raggedy and rather crude. Their armor is a hodgepodge of pieces made from other races and scrapped over strategically vulnerable bits of the ogre's body. Ogres have rough, gnarled, and warty skin, and being veterans of countless battles, Golgfag's lads are covered in scars. So, you have the first real kind of big, monstrous infantry unit of the Dogs of War here in Golgfag's Mercenary Ogres. And the tabletop actually has the ogres having it's like impact charges or thundering charge. I can't remember. It's one or the other. And they actually do damage before both sides can confer actual melee hits. So in Total War Warhammer, it'd be pretty obvious to me that these would have a charge bonus or some sort of charge mechanic where when they got in, that they would knock everything around, just like a lot of the cavalry units do when they charge into infantry units and the such. But they do cause fear. They are talked about as having heavy armor as far as their actual weapons and armor description go, even though their appearance is a little bit contrary to that. So we would have a fear-causing, heavy armor, 2-weapon-wielding monstrous unit. So you'd have something that's kind of similar to the Orc's Crimson Killas, you know, when you've got your Black Orc unit carrying 2 axes. This would instead be a monstrous, heavily armored unit carrying, again, 2 weapons. But they do instill fear. So this is going to be a really awesome way for, again, armies that don't have monstrous infantry to field it. You know, you're looking at your Empire, you're looking at your dwarfs, units that just don't have the staying power that a monstrous infantry unit does bring, as being able to be recruited into their army, which is pretty great. But pretty easy, pretty simple guys here. And if you guys really haven't noticed, with the Dogs of War, there's nothing like overly game-breaking. It's just a way for you to bring something for your army that your army does not have. Dwarfs having the ability to now bring monstrous infantry, or now being able to bring cavalry, or the ability for chaos or undead to have archers. This is what the Dogs of War is meant for, is to fill those gaps that your army naturally creates as a weakness of part of the army. So you can see here that there's, like I said, there's nothing that's over the top where you're like, oh man, that's going to be meta defining. That's got to be in everyone's army. But that starts off here with Goldfag. Let's jump on over to Long Drong, and we'll kind of go into his little backstory here as well. And just to kind of reinforce, this is all speculation. I'm just kind of trying to share the glory of the Dogs of War lore with y'all, but at the same time trying to color it with what I think or hope what we would hopefully see in a Dogs of War DLC or expansion with Total War Warhammer 1/2. But let's jump into Long Drong Slayer's Pirates. Long Drong, sorry about that, who, as his name suggests, was a rather tall dwarf and claimed a dubious line of descent from Drong the Hard, legendary dwarf ancestor known for many sagas, began his career as a dwarf seafarer in Barak Var. He worked his way up from cabin dwarf to captain of the dwarf trading ship, the Barrel of Ale, which brought fine dwarf brews by the sea route to faraway colonies. That was until one terrible voyage around the coast of Sartosa. A storm blew up, the worst for 100 years, and the ship foundered on the treacherous rocks. Although the crew were washed up to the shore, the entire cargo of the rare dwarf ales was lost. The disaster was something no dwarf could bear, and no self-respecting dwarf captain would wish to survive. Long Drong knew his career as a dwarf trader was over. He resolved to become a slayer on the seven seas and to seek a heroic end worthy of his saga. His crew, who were just as ashamed by the loss of the cargo as their captain, followed his example and swore upon their ancestors to lead a life of roving sea slayers until a worthy death ended their shame and redeemed them in legend. Having thus sworn, Long Drong, now known as Long Drong Slayer, trekked inland to his destiny, which was to become the most notorious pirate ever to lurk on Sartosa. His first act was to storm the stronghold of the dreaded pirate Capitano Sissisico and capture his ship and treasure stash. With the latter, Long Drong hired dwarf craftsmen to rebuild the flimsy vessel into something a dwarf could be proud of, not sparing the iron, of course. He also hired dwarf smiths to forge cannons for the vessel, which Long Drong named the Fair Fragar, after a famous dwarf maiden of Barak Var, rumored to be very beautiful. A figurehead representing her was carved by the crew. Unfortunately, neither Long Drong nor any of his crew had ever seen a real-life dwarf maiden, so they had to rely on their imagination and hearsay. The result, parts of which were shod in brass, made an awesome ram on the prow of the ship. The prisoners, now chained in Long Drong's dungeons, were freed in return for telling him all they knew about buried treasure and handing over any maps they had. Long Drong learned that the key to success was often the possession of a pay chest full of gold, with which to hire a mercenary army and hold it together under your command. Many such pay chests had been lost in battle, and there were mercenary generals willing to pay handsomely for their return, even double the value of anything in the chest, or a great fortune for the empty chest alone. This was because recovery of a lost pay chest is a matter of pride among mercenary generals, who regard such chests in the same way as other races do their army standards. So Long Drong let it be known that, being a seafaring dwarf, he could seek out and rescue a lost pay chest wherever it may be in the known world and return it to its rightful owner. All he asked was to keep any treasure that he might find in it, plus a reward in gold equal to as much as the chest would hold. By the standards of mercenary generals, this was but a small price to pay for the restoration of an honor and respect, and soon offers to hire the services came flowing in by swift messengers. Thus, the fair Farragar voyaged to many distant lands, Araby, Lustria, Albion, and many uncharted islands, and brought back various pay chests which may or may not have been genuine. In doing so, Long Drong raided the treasure hoards of many notorious pirates and corsairs and made countless enemies determined to get their revenge on him. A price was on his head. Everyone sought to accomplish his doom. What more could a seafaring slayer ask for? His only friends turned out to be those mercenary generals for whom had restored honor, and those soon began to hire Long Drong and his pirate crew to fight a regiment in their armies. Their tasks, needless to say, was to seek out and capture the enemy pay chest on the battlefield. Only reckless dwarf sea slayers seeking a heroic end would take on or succeed in such a task, as Long Drong has still not yet to meet his doom. So the captain is obviously Long Drong Slayer. His motto is Lost Pay Chest, Recovery Our Specialty. And their battle cry is 15 dwarfs and a dead dwarf's chest, yo ho ho and a flagon of ale. Their appearance is Long Drong Slayer has a hook hand, peg leg, eye patch, long red plated beard, pistol stuffed down his breeches, and a parrot on his shoulder which says, bits of gold, all the time. His crew are a swarthy bunch of rogues who are proud to fight under the skull and crossbones flag. So you have a really cool kind of pirate-themed unit here with the Long Drong Slayers, but the cool thing is that they are Slayers. There's the Slayer unit. So they don't have the iconic axe of a Slayer. In fact, they don't have armor, just as true to any Slayer unit in Total War, or I'm sorry, in Warhammer in general. But they do carry a sword and a pistol. So how I kind of see this translating in Total War Warhammer 2 is maybe a company or a unit similar to the Free Company Militia. So they've got a sword in one hand and their pistol in the other, so they can do that ranged combat, but also be very effective in close combat. I see them as maybe having some sort of AP mechanic from their pistols, and either an anti-large mechanic as per most Slayers, or an anti-infantry mechanic because they've got swords rather than their typical axes. But they are going to be immune to psychology if they are included, because that is a staple of all Slayers, like the rule right here. Like all Slayers, the Dwarf Pirates are immune to psychology and break tests. So I could definitely see that being a possibility. They do have an ability called Dwarf Rum, which is, basically the rule describes it as being, they ingest this rum that is basically laced with gunpowder and iron fillings that causes just such a stench that other units can't deploy around the Dwarf Slayers. But most importantly, when units get into close combat with them, it reduces their combat effectiveness. So I could see them as having an aura that would reduce the combat effectiveness of units around them, and I think that would be hilarious as far as like the theme of the Dogs of War go. And as we've really talked about, what makes the Dogs of War is the thematic use of every single one of them in your army, or the comedic kind of like little quirks that they've got, like Dwarf Rum being a rule for a grim dark fantasy game is hilarious. The good kind of irony, you know? But I think that this would be a really cool way to get a unit very similar to Free Company Militia, or what we will see with Lothar and Seaguard, into the game. Because I think the Free Company Militia, while an underutilized unit, is a really, really fun unit. And the Lothar and Seaguard are my favorite unit in tabletop. So this would be another unit I think that would just flourish on the battlefield. But that kind of rounds out here with the Long Drong Slayers. And we'll kind of jump on over to one unit that we haven't heard from in anything we've talked about so far. So this one will be kind of unique, mainly because it hails from Araby, which is a region we really haven't talked about in much of any of these lore videos yet, but one I hope to jump into more here in coming videos. But let's jump into Al-Mukhtar's Desert Dogs. Young Werner Gluck was sent by his parents to an exclusive school in Marienburg, a common fate for children of rich and famous parents who couldn't be bothered to raise their offspring for themselves. As a consequence, childhood was a lonely and deeply unhappy time for him. The schoolmasters beat him frequently, and the older boys adopted him as their personal slave. Werner lived in constant anticipation of a sound thrashing. He learned to endure things by immersing himself in dreams of foreign travel and exotic lands. Years later, Werner Gluck stepped from a Tilean merchant ship onto the harbor of Lashik, city of the Arabian corsairs. His eagerness to travel the world had brought him to the greatest city of Araby. Swarthy-skinned boys dressed in rags scampered about his feet, offering to carry his bags and attempting to pick his pockets. He sent them away with a single word of command. The boys gawped in amazement and ran away quickly. They did not expect a blonde-haired, blue-eyed stranger to speak their language, let alone to be so familiar with the coarse vernacular of Araby. Perhaps he was no ordinary stranger at all, but the mysterious Al-Mukhtar, the Chosen One, whose coming was foretold that very year. Werner knew nothing of this old legend. He was gratified to find the people of Araby friendly and generous, at least once he had spoken to them, after which they generally stopped trying to steal his belongings. The word began to spread through the city. Werner remained oblivious of his growing fame. One day, he decided to undertake a journey out into the desert to see some famous ruins. He hired guides and camels and set out eastward. After 3 days, the caravan was attacked by bandits. Werner's guides ran off as soon as the bandits attacked, except for blind Ibn, the boy who didn't really realize what was going on until too late, and then ran exactly in the wrong direction and was easily caught. Werner, being too obstinate to flee, was caught up after a fierce fight in which he gave a fine display of his fist-fighting skills, a skill that he had learned by necessity in his school days. The bandits' leader was Sheikh Ahmed Shufti, a squint-eyed son of the sand, dressed, like his warriors, in voluminous flowing robes. The sheik had never seen an old worlder before, but was impressed by his captive's pluck. The sheik decided to stake out Werner in the desert, and beat him to death slowly over several days. Whilst they were entertained by his cries and pitiful pleading, the bandits would roast one of the camels. After 3 days of torture and no water, though, Werner had uttered not one cry of pain. The only words he had spoken were to defy his captors and curse their closer relatives. The sheik was impressed, and his men were getting a bit nervous. Surely no ordinary man could endure so much pain. They were not to know that Werner was used to beatings, having suffered far worse at the hands of his fellow pupils at school. Once they had hung him for 3 days in the flue of the great chimney in the headmaster's study. He had not uttered a word then either, not even when old Master Greek had lit the fire to warm his old bones. Werner could hear the bandits muttering about Al-Mukhtar, but he had no idea that it meant the Chosen One. Al-Mukhtar, he cried as loudly as he could. The bandits who were huddled around their campfire had grown scared of the old worlder after Ibn had told them about the legend and various wondrous things he had supposedly done in Lashik. Also, things had begun to mysteriously disappear, mostly small valuable possessions, and Ibn was careful to explain this was a sure sign that the bandits had fallen under Al-Mukhtar's curse. Consequently, when they heard Werner's cry, they threw themselves to the ground, wailing and crying, Al-Mukhtar, Al-Mukhtar, forgive us. Needless to say, Werner did forgive them. In fact, he became one of them. The life of a desert warrior sounded adventurous and exciting. He abandoned his old name, clothes, and habits and became Al-Mukhtar. Soon the bandits were known and feared all along the coast of Araby. They became renowned as the Desert Dogs, horsemen of unparalleled ferocity, wielding mighty scimitars of gleaming steel. Their battle cry of Al-Mukhtar became feared throughout the land. Soon, the Desert Dogs became such a nuisance that the Sheik of Lashiks was compelled to hire them by means of large bribes. At first, he sent them eastwards to fight the undead. Al-Mukhtar very much enjoyed traveling the land of the undead, but the Desert Dogs grew restless, and soon he led them northwards through the Badlands and into the border princes. The dashing horsemen proved ideally suited to the fast, mobile kind of warfare in the pioneer country, and Al-Mukhtar was soon as famous in the frontiers of the Old World as he was in Araby. Only the continued disappearance of small but valuable items from the pockets and saddlebags of the Desert Dogs continued to trouble the warriors. Plainly, they must fight harder and more loyally to end the curse that their mistreatment of Al-Mukhtar had invoked. So the captain is obviously Al-Mukhtar, son of the desert. Their motto is... The Desert Dogs have two famous mottos. There is the official version, favored by Al-Mukhtar himself, Mighty are the Mukhtarin, and then there is the less righteous version, often employed by Sheikh Ahmed Shufti, Desert Dogs run faster because the trees are farther apart. The battle cry is Al-Mukhtar. In their appearance, the Desert Dogs ride white horses and are swathed from head to toe in voluminous cloth to protect them from the fierce desert sun. They insist on wearing this clothing regardless of the climate they find themselves in, or whatever time of day or night it happens to be. All that can be seen are their eyes and hands. So, cavalry unit again. We saw another one in the Venators, and now we have one here in the Al-Mukhtar's Desert Dogs, and these guys are a little bit more of a light cav presence, right? So I definitely see them as having the fast cavalry rule, a vanguard special rule as well, but they're not going to have an armor. Their weapons and armor describes them as having large... Okay, so the Desert Dogs are armed with massive slashing scimitars. They wear no armor, but carry a shield shaped like the moon. So I could maybe see them having like a bronze or silver shield to help them defend against any kind of missile attacks, but with that scimitar, probably an anti-infantry and AP characteristic. They're not going to probably be as good against, say, maybe Cav, but you could probably get them in a vanguard deployment to really harass a front line to get some good cycle charging in. That's how I could see them being used in a Total War Warhammer 1 or 2 kind of arena. They do have a banner, the black banner of the Mukhtarin. So it makes me wonder, in the game, it basically helps out with leadership roles. So I think it's either going to confer a negative penalty to the enemy or a positive bonus to you as the ally. But again, this is a great way for armies that don't have fast cav to get a fast cav presence that's going to be more of a melee-centric fast cav. So that maybe will help out with some armies that are trying to push into melee range, such as maybe the Beastmen, which again would already really have a good cav presence with their Centaurs, but this would at least kind of add a nice element to it. But this was our first real kind of taste of Araby, and our kind of a nice fast cav unit to round out that taste as well, because it kind of fits into the whole theme. And as I've said many times now, Dogs of War is all about their theme, and Araby does have a little bit of the fast attack, fast cav going from it, from the book, the War Master book that came out ages ago, which is really the only detailed anything we have in regards to the closest thing we'd have to a Araby army list. But we'll jump on over to one of the last guys we're going to be covering here today, and this one's a kind of a special one because it's not from Araby in that sense of special, but it's different because it is not a unit. So this is Asarnil the Dragonlord, and we'll hear a little bit about him, but this is going to be our first real non-unit, solely monstrous character that we'll hear from the Dogs of War here. The legend of Asarnil the Dragonlord is known throughout Ulthuan. Asarnil was the son of Asarian, the hero of 1,000 battles. From his earliest years, Asarnil was brought up in the martial traditions of Caledor. He became a great warrior and one of the few elves still able to rouse the dragons who slept beneath the mountains of the High Elf realm. His companion, Deathfang, was one of the greatest dragons that the princes of Caledor could still wake from their deep slumber. Together, they were all but invincible, and their fame reached far beyond the boundaries of Caledor. During the Great War against Chaos, Asarnil fought with distinction alongside his brother, dragon princes. Asarnil commanded them in battle, and it was because of him that Caledor was not overrun during those dark times. After the Battle of the Finneval Plains, Asarnil had been ordered to link up with the High Elf forces marching from Lothern. Once the dragon princes arrived, the combined forces of Lothern and Caledor could destroy the last major Dark Elf force in Ulthuan. But before Asarnil could fly to the Phoenix King's aid, word came that Caledor itself was under attack. Under the command of Asarnil, an entire flight of the dragon riders sped back through the skies to protect their homeland. In a brilliant assault, the dragon riders of Caledor swept the Dark Elves to the sea, and Caledor was saved. Triumphant, Asarnil headed back towards the rendezvous with the Phoenix King, confident that great rewards and honor awaited him upon his arrival. On hearing that his orders had been disobeyed, Phoenix King Finnubar became angry. If his troops had come under attack without the support of the dragon princes, they could have faced destruction. When Asarnil and his fellow dragon riders arrived at the Phoenix King's camp, no parade awaited them. Instead, Asarnil was summoned before the Phoenix King himself. Enraged, Asarnil declined and swore that he was no longer a subject of the crown of Ulthuan. The response of Finnubar the Seafarer was quick and harsh. Asarnil would be stripped of his title and lands and banished from Ulthuan, unless he would face the Phoenix King's justice. Proud to the last, Asarnil declined. Asarnil was now a prince without a domain, a lord in exile. He gathered his weapons and armor, mounted Deathfang, and left the blessed island of Ulthuan. Asarnil headed towards the old ruins of an elf city in the south of the Old World. He found that humans now inhabited the land. His dragon descended in the city of Remus in the land of Tilea, much to the dismay of his citizens. However, the Prince of Remus realized that such a mighty ally would give them the advantage they needed in their war. He immediately hired the services of Asarnil for the war Remus was waging against its rival city of Meragliano. With the help of Asarnil and the awesome might of Deathfang, Remus decisively defeated their rivals and brought the war to a successful conclusion. Indeed, such was the terror inspired by Deathfang that most of the men of Meragliano threw down their arms and fled from the field without a battle. In the naval battle of the Sirens' Rocks, Asarnil and Deathfang destroyed Meragliano's entire fleet and ended the city's supremacy at sea. Since those days, the proud banner of Asarnil has flown over countless battlefields in the Old World. Only the greatest princes can afford the exorbitant fee of the Dragonlord, but a general calling upon Asarnil is almost guaranteed to be victorious. In his heart of hearts, Asarnil still dreams of returning to Caledor in triumph with the riches he has won, but for now his lance and sword are for hire. Captain, being the only captain, the only person, Asarnil the Dragonlord, his motto is "Victory is a foregone conclusion," and the battle cry is "Wahnil, Wahnil," in the battle cry of the Caledorians calling for vengeance and death. Appearance: attired in all of the splendor of the dragon princes of old, Asarnil and his dragon are a truly magnificent sight on the battlefield. Glittering Ithilmar armor and shining gems combined with the sheer presence of the great dragon Deathfang are unforgettable, if you survive to tell the tale. So, you have now a monstrous unit, you have a hero level unit, a lord level unit in Asarnil here, and just like the description says, he's a heavily armored dragon rider. And Deathfang he's a great green dragon, and the star, moon, and sun dragons, we've already kind of talked about them in the way that they have differing abilities, sun being the lowest and star being the highest. the Great Green Dragon would kind of fall into the same level as the Star Dragon. The Great Green Dragon was an old 5th edition term that is no longer in existence, but the profile of Deathfang matches that of a Star Dragon. So 7 weapon skill, 7 strength, 7 toughness, for those of you that are familiar with those figures from tabletop. So Asarnil rides the best and toughest dragon in all of the game, which are Sun Dragons. Or no, Star Dragons. We already talked about Sun Dragons not being the best, but still good because they're dragons. But Asarnil has some special abilities here. He's got a Dragon Tamer ability that makes it so that he has an increased control of Deathfang, but it also makes it, which isn't really affected in the game, but it makes it so that other dragons he comes against, hey, sorry, woo, shit, puberty right there. Other dragons that he comes up against have a negative leadership role, and they get a lot of negative a lot of negative penalties to them. So I'd be interested to see if they add a Dragon Tamer type of mentality that he would confer a penalty to large creatures in this sort, like a Manticore, or a Chaos Dragon, or a Griffin, or any of the Pegasi. So it'd be cool to see something like that, because we haven't seen something like that in this game. And with Total War Warhammer 2, we are going to be having a rampage mechanic with the Lizardmen. And there is a special rule called Dragon Rage for Asarnil, so that if Asarnil gets killed, his dragon just flies off into a fit of rage, just going to town on everything. So if that does in fact transfer over, that'd be interesting. They did say that with the pre-order / Old Friends DLC, it's going to have a mechanic that's going to kind of tease / come in from Total War Warhammer 2. So it wouldn't surprise, I guess it wouldn't surprise me, that's kind of a foregone statement, but I'm trying to say that if they add a breath attack to Deathfang here, it'd be a great way to warm us up to that breath attack that we're going to be seeing in Total War Warhammer 2. So if that mechanic kind of came across early, that'd be awesome. But Asarnil himself is going to be heavy armored, probably going to be an AP anti-large flyer, of course, and with the dragon, he's definitely going to be causing terror. There is one ability he has here, or an enchanted item called the Amulet of Dragonheart, and it basically subtracts the melee attack of units that he goes up against. So it'd be interesting to see if they do that as well, maybe even as a targetable ability, or as a you click it and it causes an aura around him to have a minus to their melee attack during that time. But that rounds off Asarnil here, and we'll get into the last unit of this video here. And this one's really cool, very thematic to what we've been talking about a lot with Norska, but what a lot of people have been talking about in their Norska lore videos that have been floating around YouTube right now. And that is Beorg, Bearstruck, and the Bearmen of URSLO. So we're going to hear a little bit about some Norskin mercenaries here. So in Yersford, in the frozen north, the great hall of URSLO is to be found. It is built of great timbers hewn from mighty trees. In this hall resides Beorg, chieftain of the Bearmen of URSLO. That is, when he is not raiding or fighting. When Beorg, son of Braun, cracked the skulls of Ulsdau and Grail, twin sons of Hurin, chieftain of the tribe of the Wolf, the gods chose to show their considerable favor. As Beorg threw himself upon his enemies, his back arced and split, his ribs cracked and turned in upon his body. His face was consumed from within by a snarling black muzzle. The gift of the wearer was upon him. The gift of the gods to the people of Norska. He was Bearstruck. Beorg is a bear of extraordinary power. When he enters battle, he turns into a savage bear of immense size. This is a great and marvelous thing, even amongst the tribes of the north, many of whose people spontaneously develop were shapes in battle. Amongst Beorg's folk, the tribe of the bear, it is common for warriors to sprout claws, snarling teeth, mane-like fur, and bear-shaped muzzles. But alone of all his people, Beorg carries the full shape of the bear within him. Only he is Bearstruck, the mark of lordship amongst his people. Beorg was soon acknowledged as the chieftain of his tribe, the Yersfjordings, or Bearmen. Like all, I'm sorry about the pronunciation there, it's really hard, but URSFJORDINGS. Some of my more Norse viewers can definitely tell me how to pronounce that, because that is a doozy. Like all the savages of the Northlands, Beorg despises the weakness of lesser men. He cares nothing for the so-called civilized lands that lie to the south. When the Chaos armies of Warlord Archaon marched upon the lands of the Empire, Beorg gladly joined them. His warriors had grown tired of easy conquests amongst the tribes of the north. At the Battle of the Monoliths, Beorg led his warriors against the army of Archlector Manfeld of Noln. The soldiers of the Empire were horrified to find themselves confronted by men in half-bear shape, snarling and tearing like the savages they were. Amongst them all was the towering shape of Beorg, casting aside his foes with great swipes of his claws, knocking heads from shoulders and tearing arms from their sockets. After the battle, Beorg realized that the lands of the south offered plenty of opportunity for bloodletting and savagery. His warriors fought their way through the Empire, occasionally finding employment, but more often living by pillage and robbery. Eventually, the beastmen crossed the mountains and found themselves in the border princes. This was a time of great battles and much plundering, and Beorg's fame grew rapidly. At night, the bearmen would sit around their camp, drinking so as only the Northmen can, and singing rousing songs of their great ventures. It was during one such session of drunken revelry that the bearmen were ambushed by goblin bandits. Many were shot with black arrows before Beorg strode forward to snap the goblin chief's neck like a twig. During this battle, Jorl the Young was struck by an arrow which took out an eye and left a scar running across his face. Despite his injuries, Jorl held onto the tribe's banner, the Bear of URSLO, an immense bearskin slain by Braun to celebrate the birth of his son Beorg. Beorg rewarded the young warrior with gold and the honored place in battle by his side. So the captain is obviously Beorg Bearstruck. The motto is "The Dark Gods Bless Us." The battle cry. Beorg and his men launched themselves upon the foe with a mighty bear-like growl. The appearance, the bearmen like... The bearmen, like many of the tribes of Norska, are affected by the dark power of chaos. This has made them as much beasts as men, and all are touched with the mark of the werebear, so some extend with shaggy hair, brutal ursine faces, massive teeth, and slashing claws. They wear barbaric clothing made of furs, held together with leather straps, and they have wild, unkempt hair. Their iron helmets have horns, which make them look especially ferocious, and many wear long, shaggy cloaks made from wild bears, often with the head or claws left on. So, the book describes this as being Beorg and 4 bearmen, including the Jorl. So I think that we're going to see another monstrous infantry unit here, especially because they're all werebears in one way or another, either the claws or the faces and whatnot. So it'd be really awesome to see that unit, almost like a very small but very strong monstrous infantry unit again, that would cause fear. They would have that light armor, but again, be monstrous infantry. They do have 2 special rules. Their bear banner gives them frenzy, and they have a bear fang talisman, which actually gives them a ward save. So it'd be awesome to see that as well. So a frenzied monstrous unit with a ward save that are werebears charging across the battlefield and into the foe. It's pretty damn awesome in my mind here. And it would be something very unique, right? We haven't seen anything really like this in Total War Warhammer at all. And it does kind of fit into what we've heard with the possibility of Norska coming out as a playable faction or as a DLC in the Old Friend or the pre-ordered DLC bonus. But we will see. Hopefully these guys do sneak onto the roster here. And again, the Dogs of War themselves being an actual army is speculative, but I think it's pretty safe to say with what we're doing with what we're seeing with the Estalian conquistadors and how they really want to tie up all of the races of Warhammer into these games. You know, we know that with Total War Warhammer 3 we're going to be seeing another set of races, so maybe that's going to be more of the demons and the such. So maybe the Dogs of War will wait until then, maybe they won't. Hopefully they won't. I think part of me thinks that with the second iteration we're going to see a lot more variety and a lot more character from some of the armies that come out, and like I've been saying almost all video, the Dogs of War are no short of character. But that wraps up all the Dogs of War now, guys. All the units that are in the book are now talked about here. If you want to know anything more about, say, the special characters, like the special characters, they've got Borgio the Besieger and Leonardo da Miragliano. So they do have some, but they're not as important to the lore, I guess you could say, as some of the other lords we've talked about and the such. So if you do want to hear about them, let me know. I will definitely do a video for you guys. But we got some more goodies coming out for you, and hopefully some big reveals this week from Creative Assembly as to what this whole month's theme is going to be. Is this going to be the Dark Elf month? Is this going to be the Skaven month? It's kind of been a little weird with their reveals so far. But thanks for watching here, guys. Do let me know if there's anything you want to know about from this video, or help me clear up any facts or anything like that, always love to get feedback or share some more stuff with you. But thanks for watching, guys, and take care.